I've always felt like I'm standing slightly outside of the frame, observing, measuring. It's safer there. But on a blistering July afternoon, my carefully constructed perimeter was breached, not by choice, but by the relentless cajoling of my friend, Sarah. I found myself at the City Aquatic Center, a place I viewed with the same apprehension one reserves for tax audits. The smell of chlorine and synthetic rubber was overwhelming, a sharp, chemical scent that seemed to promise danger. "Just dip your feet, Layla. It's 24, Sarah had chirped, gesturing vaguely at the cacophony of shrieking children and sun-reddened adults. I managed the shallow end, wading up to my knees, feeling the grit of the pool floor beneath my soles. My anxiety wasn't about the germs, it was the profound, elemental terror of losing control. I couldn't swim. It felt like a fundamental flaw, one I usually kept hidden beneath layers of meticulous planning and dry humor. But Sarah, fueled by iced coffee and bad decisions, wasn't having it. Before I could process her intent, she had grabbed my wrist, laughing, and dragged me toward the boundary line. "Come on, just hang on to the rope." The deeper water was immediately different, cooler, more intimidating, the blue absorbing the light and seeming infinite. I clung to the buoyant lines separating the 4-foot section from the real drop-off. The playful energy of the moment evaporated instantly when Sarah, demonstrating some aggressive form of splash tag, propelled a massive wave over my head. The shock of the cold, coupled with the immediate ingestion of water, yanked the breath from my lungs. It wasn't a slow realization of danger, it was instant, white-hot panic. I thrashed, losing my grip on the rope, swallowing mouthfuls of acrid liquid. My movements were useless, heavy, dragging me down. The noise of the crowded pool faded into a high-pitched whine inside my ears. This is it, I thought, with a horrible, detached clarity. This is how the story ends, stupidly, in 4.5 feet of municipal water. The world turned green, then murky gray. My chest felt like it was encased in granite. Then came the impact, not the soft surrender of the water, but a sharp, authoritative grip beneath my arms, powerful and steady. I was being hauled upward, the speed itself shocking. I broke the surface, coughing violently, blind, choking. The next sensation was the hard, dry edge of the deck beneath my back. I was dizzy, drenched, humiliated, and alive. A voice, calm and utterly commanding, cut through the residual ringing in my ears. "Clear the area. We need space." I opened my eyes, still swimming in disorientation, and focused on the face hovering above mine. She was young, maybe my age, wearing the brilliant white and red uniform of the safety staff. Her dark hair was slicked back, pulled into a severe, professional knot. Water streamed down her neck, but her features were chiseled, sharp. And her eyes, they were the startling shade of sea glass, focused entirely on the crisis. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer a gentle, bedside manner. She was pure, terrifying competence. As she tilted my chin up, preparing to administer breathing assistance, I had a brief, electric moment of observation, even while nearly unconscious. Her skin was flawless, cool against the humid air, and the slight frown of concentration pulled at the corners of her mouth. She was utterly beautiful, a vision of calculated strength. A moment later, the life-saving rush of air entered my lungs, jarring me fully back into reality. I was safe, and I was immediately, hopelessly captivated. The paramedics were tedious, asking rote questions about nausea and dizziness. I answered them with a cool precision that belied the frantic drumming in my chest. Sarah hovered nearby, pale and apologizing profusely, but I barely heard her. My focus was entirely on the figure standing a few yards away, speaking quietly into a radio, the safety officer. I learned her name from a quick, hushed conversation between two maintenance workers. Chloe. Chloe. The sound of it was clean, like the water she commanded. Once the emergency crew had determined I was merely traumatized and waterlogged, not medically compromised, I was directed to the administrative office for an incident report. Chloe followed, her presence a quiet anchor in the chaotic environment. As she sat across the sterile metal table from me, clicking her pen with methodical impatience, I had my first prolonged look. Her professionalism was a palpable force field. She carried herself with an economy of movement, every gesture efficient. Her uniform, crisp against the humid air, framed strong shoulders. There was a discipline in her posture that I found intensely appealing, a sense of control I admired but rarely achieved in the physical world. "Layla," she stated, reading my name from the form. Her voice was low, carrying a slight, musical undertone that contradicted the seriousness of her job. "You need to understand the danger you were in. Never enter the deep end, if you are not proficient. You were lucky." "I understand," I replied, my voice raspy. I met her gaze, making sure my gratitude was visible, but also layering it with something more difficult to define, an acknowledgement of her power. "You saved my life." She accepted the praise without flinching, without false modesty. "It's my job." That response, so concise and unwavering, solidified my internal decision. I had spent my life as the silent observer, analyzing complex systems from a distance. Now a system, a person, had intersected with my life in a fundamental, physical way. I wanted to be closer to that quiet confidence, that beautiful certainty. I wanted her attention focused solely on me, not as a casualty, but as a person. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the cold table. The lingering scent of chlorine hung in the air, sharp and familiar, as I waited for her to speak. "I need to learn how to swim," I announced, the statement sounding more declarative than pleading. "Properly. I won't put myself, or you, in that position again. I need instruction." I let the silence hang, allowing the implication to settle. I wasn't asking for the community class. I was asking for her. Chloe's expression didn't change immediately, but her thumb stopped pressing against the cap of her pen. It was the smallest break in her composure. "We have certified instructors, Layla," she said, her tone reverting to institutional formality. "I want you," I pressed, keeping my voice level, rational. "You know exactly what my current capabilities are. And I trust you implicitly. After today, I don't think I could learn from anyone else." She hesitated. It was the resistance I expected. Professionalism battling something undefined. "I am the safety officer," she finally said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "My schedule is complex, and private lessons are rare." "I'm flexible," I countered smoothly. "And I'm persistent." I saw the flicker then, a grudging respect for my stubbornness. She gave a curt nod.
"Fine.
"I will check the schedule. But this is strictly instructional, Layla. We cover technique, safety, and endurance. Nothing else." I wouldn't expect anything less, I promised, already mapping out the intricate, subtle path I would take. The first session was scheduled for 6:30 a.m., just as the sun was burning off the early morning haze. The pool was empty save for the two of us and a distant maintenance worker sweeping the deck. The silence amplified the sound of the filtering pumps, a steady, hypnotic drone. Chloe was waiting near lane 1, wearing a dark one-piece suit that was just as professional and severe as her uniform. It offered no hint of compromise. "We start with breath control," she directed, her tone clinical. "You need to conquer the panic reflex before you worry about propulsion." For the next hour, I was submerged in the mechanics of fear management. I didn't learn to swim much, but I learned a great deal about the meticulous nature of Chloe's instruction. She was patient, yet firm, correcting my form with minimal, necessary contact. Her hands on my back, guiding my rotation as I practiced floating, were steady and professional, exactly what I needed to trust the water a little more. The cool water around me felt less threatening with her there, my focus on her instructions instead of fleeting sensations. I focused intensely on the texture of the cool, smooth ceramic tiles beneath my fingers, letting the sensory experience anchor me, preventing my inner turmoil from becoming apparent. I struggled with some movements, my muscles still tense from old fear, and when I misaligned my hips, Chloe stepped closer to correct me. Her touch light, professional, focused only on fixing my form. I focused on breathing, letting her guidance steady me instead of overthinking the moment. "You're stiffening your neck, Layla," she observed, her voice close to my ear. "Relax. Imagine you are floating on an infinite cloud." Hard to imagine an infinite cloud when I can still taste the chlorine from last week, I murmured, a deliberate attempt at conversational intimacy. She didn't laugh, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch slightly before she composed herself. "Focus. Don't distract yourself with metaphors." I noticed the small details. A tiny, silvery scar just above her right wrist, the way the water beaded on her skin without being absorbed, the smell of her sunscreen, which was earthy and clean. She was perfect in her confidence, and I enjoyed watching her enforce the boundary I was so carefully trying to erode. During a brief rest, perched on the edge of the pool, I risked a more direct observation. "You're incredibly disciplined, Chloe," I commented, shaking the water from my hair. She adjusted her goggles, avoiding my gaze, which I took as a positive sign of internal engagement. Discipline is survival, especially in this job. "And outside of it?" I pressed gently. "Do you apply the same level of discipline to everything?" She finally met my eyes. Hers were clear, holding a certain reserve that seemed impenetrable. "I prefer clarity to chaos, Layla. In all things." The session ended abruptly, as dictated by the clock. As I headed to the locker room, I knew I hadn't made a physical advance, but I had introduced an element of intellectual curiosity into her carefully controlled environment. The strategy was slow, relying on attrition, but proximity was working its magic. The morning lessons continued. The rhythmic splashing and my labored breathing became the soundtrack to our developing, strange relationship. I was genuinely learning. Fear was still present, but diluted by my intense focus on Chloe's instruction and the intoxicating awareness of her presence. My strategy evolved. I began weaving subtle, personal details into our conversations. Not grand confessions, but small, vulnerable observations about my life, my reserved nature, my struggle with connecting with people. I presented these vulnerabilities as facts, not pleas for sympathy. One morning, while practicing breaststroke kicks, she commented on the precision of my movements, saying I thought too much about physics. "I analyze everything," I admitted, pushing off the wall. "It's how I maintain balance. If I understand the mechanism, I can control the outcome. Except for this." I gestured vaguely at the water. "This is pure reaction, and I hate it." She watched me, her expression thoughtful. "Reaction is faster than analysis. It saves lives." "It nearly ended mine," I said quietly. She lowered herself into the water, resting her forearms on the gutter next to mine. The closeness was immediate and startling. She wasn't correcting my form, she was just present. "What were you thinking, Layla, when you went under?" she asked, her voice hushed, breaking the professional barrier in a way that previous instruction hadn't. I closed my eyes, recalling the terror. Nothing coherent. Just the texture of the light going dim. And then, when you pulled me up, I thought about the sheer force of it. The certainty. Her gaze softened, losing its sharp edge of professionalism. "It's instinct. Training just harnesses it." I risked a small, genuine smile. Instinct, training, and the most reassuring jawline I've ever seen. The comment was light, slightly inappropriate, and completely honest. Chloe pulled her arms out of the water instantly, her movement abrupt. She turned away, collecting a pair of flippers from the equipment box. The small moment of shared gravity dissipated immediately. "We need to focus on flutter kick mechanics now," she stated, her voice taut, retreating behind her professional shield. I felt a quiet triumph. I had caused a disruption. The clarity she valued had been momentarily clouded by an unexpected, intimate exchange. The boundary wasn't impregnable, it was just heavily guarded. I needed to find the gate, not try to climb the wall. My enticement strategy had to move beyond the pool deck. The pool demanded too much professionalism from her, too much focus on her job. I needed to see her where she was marginally less guarded. I began timing my arrivals and departures to overlap with the end of her official shift, watching the clock with hawk-like precision. On a cloudy Tuesday, I finished my lesson and waited, feigning deep focus on my phone while sitting near the lobby entrance. She emerged 30 minutes later, out of uniform, wearing loose cotton trousers and a simple, fitted dark shirt. Without the lifeguard whistle and the bright red attire, she seemed softer, less imposing, but the disciplined carriage remained. Her hair, usually slicked back, was slightly damp, curling around the nape of her neck. She spotted me instantly and paused. The pause was confirmation, she noticed. "Waiting for a ride, Layla?" she asked, her tone friendly, but still reserved. "No, just organizing my day," I lied smoothly, tucking my phone into my bag. I stood up, allowing her to catch the shift in my posture, confidence replacing the student's diffidence. "I was thinking about what you said earlier about reaction versus analysis." We walked toward the parking lot together. The atmosphere of the conversation was entirely different now, casual but intense, like walking on a wire. I realized that when I nearly drowned, my mind went blank. I continued, focusing on the genuine fear that had started this. It was freeing, in a terrible way. I've always operated by strategy. But that moment, and every lesson with you since, forces me into vulnerability. I looked at her then, my gaze unwavering, letting her absorb the sincerity. I didn't have to act attracted to her. The depth of my feeling was now an open current. Chloe frowned slightly, pulling her car keys from her pocket. She seemed to be weighing her next words carefully. "Vulnerability is a choice," she finally said, looking past my shoulder toward the busy street. "And sometimes, it's the only way to genuinely connect with something difficult." She hesitated, then her eyes snapped back to mine, startlingly direct. "But I have rules, Layla. Important ones. I value my clarity." "I value mine too," I agreed softly. "But sometimes clarity means admitting when something completely unexpected has changed the structure of your life." She unlocked her car door, a dark, practical sedan. Her movement was rushed, a nervous energy she usually suppressed completely. "Drive safe, Chloe," I said, stepping back before she could respond further, leaving her with the weight of my words and the sudden, charged silence between us. As she pulled away, I watched the calculated success of the encounter settle in. The professional boundary was now thin and porous. The aquatic center, for all its size, was a remarkably small world. Gossip travels quickly on the chlorine-scented air. I noticed the glances, the other instructors, the front desk attendant, all observing the frequency of our early morning sessions and the brief, intense conversations afterward. Chloe certainly noticed. Her demeanor during the next few lessons was palpably strained. She was stricter, more focused on the minutiae of my rotation, refusing to engage in any personal exchanges. The pressure was closing in on her, and I felt a wave of guilt that my carefully managed pursuit was causing her distress. During one particularly grueling set of laps, I struggled to maintain my rhythm, feeling the weight of the scrutiny pressing down on me. I stopped, breathless, hanging onto the lane line. Chloe swam over instantly, her face a mask of concern that was pure professionalism. "What's wrong? Are you cramping?" "No," I panted, forcing myself to look her in the eye. "I think I'm just feeling the temperature of the room. And it's getting a little warm, isn't it?" It was my subtle way of acknowledging the gossip, without speaking the words. Chloe's expression tightened into one of frustration. She climbed out of the water onto the deck, her movements rigid. "If you are distracted, Layla, we need to end the session," she stated, her voice low and dangerously controlled. "I cannot compromise my position here. I won't allow this to become a complication." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because she was rejecting me, but because she was prioritizing her clarity and career above the nascent connection we were building. She had every right to. I pulled myself out of the water, dripping, standing before her. I abandoned the last vestiges of my strategic facade. "I apologize," I said genuinely, my voice quiet but firm. "That was unfair of me. My intention was never to make things difficult for you, Chloe. I admire your discipline and your commitment. I misjudged how to proceed. It was selfish." I focused on the cold, damp texture of the deck beneath my bare feet. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the filtration system. She let out a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was softer, laced with a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. I resist complications, Layla, because I've spent a long time making sure I was dependable, reliable, she confessed, her eyes meeting mine, finally holding the weight of the moment. And you are the definition of an unforeseen complication. I need to know this isn't just a game for you, or a distraction from your fear. It's the most real thing that's happened to me in years, I countered honestly. It started with fear, yes, but it became something else when you looked at me. I didn't press for a response, just allowed the truth of my statement to stand on its own. She didn't retreat this time. She only nodded slowly, accepting the sincerity of my surrender. The following lesson, everything was different. The instruction was still rigorous, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken acknowledgement. We focused on perfecting the complex six-beat kick, demanding synchronization and trust. At one point, Chloe was explaining how to maintain forward momentum without flailing. She was standing by the edge, watching me glide through the water, her expression intense. I stopped mid-lane, feeling a sudden, unexpected wave of exhaustion and emotional drainage. I wasn't panicked, but I felt exposed, having finally admitted my manipulative approach. I swam back to her, hoisting myself up to sit on the edge. I'm hitting a wall, I admit it, not about my physical ability, but my emotional state. I feel like I'm constantly waiting for you to tell me this was a mistake, that I should find another instructor. Chloe sat down beside me, her movement easy and fluid. She didn't correct my technique or tell me to keep going. She simply offered a quiet understanding. When I first took this job, I failed my rescue certification attempt, she said, staring out at the reflective surface of the water, sharing a piece of her past with me that had nothing to do with my lessons. I was too focused on the procedure. I panicked internally. I thought my lack of perfection meant I wasn't fit for the role. She paused, turning her head slightly to look at me. Perfection isn't the goal, Layla. Resilience is. And you are resilient. It was the first time she had offered true personal insight, revealing a flaw in her own fortress of clarity. She was allowing me to see the human behind the uniform. I reached out, instinctively, not reaching for her hand, but for the smooth, wet tile between us, steadying myself. Thank you for telling me that. She leaned closer, the slight shift in proximity closing the professional gap entirely. Her gaze searched mine, not analyzing my form, but seeking understanding. I need to maintain my structure, but I won't lie about what has shifted here, Chloe murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Then, she leaned in, a brief, gentle contact of lips, soft and quiet, a wordless acknowledgement of the feeling that had grown between us. It tasted faintly of salt and chlorine, a reminder of how our connection began. She pulled back almost instantly, her expression serious, but the tension around her eyes had eased. We need to be careful, she stated, her voice steady despite the seismic shift that had just occurred. I know, I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. But I don't want to be careful anymore. The unspoken rule after that moment was clear. No physical intimacy at the pool. Our connection now existed in the heavy silences and the lingering eye contact when a lesson ended. We began meeting away from the aquatic center, in quiet cafes or city parks, places where the scent of chlorine didn't dominate the air. Our conversations were intense, mapping out the architecture of our sudden bond. It's strange, I confessed one evening, sitting across from her at a small wooden table, the air thick with the smell of roasting coffee beans. I came to you to solve a problem, my fear, and used that vulnerability to get closer to you. It was a strategy. Chloe stirred her tea, her movements graceful. I know. I saw it. It was irritatingly calculated. A small, rare smile touched her lips. But the calculation eventually faded, didn't it? When you stopped overthinking and let yourself focus on learning, on trusting both the water and me. That's when I actually started listening. I stopped playing when I realized my strategy was hurting you, I admitted, focusing on the dark wood grain of the table. I don't want to be the reason for your professional instability. That's not how I want this to exist. Chloe reached out, her fingers resting lightly on the cool ceramic of my mug. The touch was noncommittal, yet intensely present. Your true self, Layla, the one who panics and overanalyzes, is the person who intrigued me, she said. I'm attracted to your intensity, not your deception. I'm usually the one observing, managing the risk. With you, I'm entirely exposed. She admitted to her profound discomfort with the attention their relationship had garnered at the facility, acknowledging the rules she felt she had to adhere to, both professional and personal. We spoke about trust, the foundational element that was much harder to build than physical proximity. We spent hours talking, not of fleeting passion, but of future challenges, shared values, and the necessity of navigating a relationship that defied her usual clarity. It was an intellectual intimacy that surpassed anything physical I had ever experienced. I found comfort not in her strength, but in her willingness to share her own weaknesses with me. The connection was a quiet, deep mooring, anchor dropped in the deep water I once feared. The shift in my relationship with water mirrored the shift in my relationship with Chloe. 6 months after the near drowning, I was no longer merely surviving the water. I was moving through it with competence. During our final official lesson, Chloe had me swim 12 continuous laps in the deep end, focusing on endurance. The distance felt enormous, but I kept my rhythm steady, hearing Chloe's low, encouraging voice only when I needed it. When I finished, pulling myself onto the deck, I was exhausted, but exhilarated. I had conquered the fear that defined my initial encounter with Chloe. Chloe stood over me, her hands on her hips, a rare, genuine expression of pride warming her features. You did it, Layla, she said, the satisfaction clear in her voice. You are completely safe now. You are proficient. I looked at her, soaked and smiling. I should thank you for dragging me into the deep end in the first place. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that was music to my ears. I was just doing my job. You did the real work. We sat together on the edge of the pool, our feet dangling in the water. I looked at the vast blue expanse that had once symbolized death and now symbolized growth. I had gone from a reluctant victim to a capable swimmer, and from a detached strategist to a genuinely connected partner. I reached out my hand, not with calculation or strategy, but with simple, undeniable affection, and laid it gently over hers, which was resting on the deck. The gesture was quiet, a wordless reaffirmation of how far we had come. Chloe squeezed my hand briefly, an acknowledgement of our private, complex victory. What now, instructor? I asked, my voice calm. Now, she said, staring at the water. We swim outside the lanes. That's always the hardest part. The aquatic center eventually became just a backdrop, not the central stage. Chloe took a slight sabbatical from teaching private lessons, creating the professional space she needed, though she remained the safety officer. We continued our quiet, intense relationship, built not on fireworks, but on honest, shared vulnerability. My transformation was profound. I no longer feared the unexpected. I welcomed the lack of control that Chloe introduced into my life. My analytical mind hadn't vanished, but it was now tempered by emotional trust. Months later, I stood near the main entrance of the aquatic center, waiting for Chloe to finish her shift. The air was cool now, hinting at autumn. I watched her across the expanse of the lobby, directing a staff member, her posture still rigorously professional. She still radiated that beautiful, focused clarity. When she finally clocked out and walked toward me, she was not the safety officer, but my partner. She took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. Ready? She asked. Always, I replied. We walked out into the gathering twilight. Our relationship was unconventional, forged in panic, built on calculated pursuit, and sustained by a quiet, fierce acceptance of one another's complexities. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but an open horizon. We had navigated the treacherous currents of fear, boundaries, and manipulation. The water was deeper now, the landscape more complex, but we were both swimming, side by side, stronger for the depths we had dared to face. My life, once defined by the terror of sinking, was now defined by the exhilarating, uncertain freedom of floating alongside her.